It's time for us to get love right, folks. And so we invite you to check out the King and Queen of Hearts.
This is an incredible training for couples who are struggling in unsatisfying sex lives.
It's also for lifelong learners, people whose relationship is great and they want to make it even better.
In this 3-part training that is filled with 8 different tutorials like the art of tantric kissing, eye gazing that is deep and intimate, connective, and not creepy, and sacred sexual meditations, you do them with your lover to juice you up before sex. Communication tips and really, really valuable relationship essentials are all found in this training.
You know, a common mistake couples make is they wait, they put it off, they avoid, they resist. And if you want to continue doing that, well, good luck. But if you really want to make a change, get this today. Don't let another month go by where you're losing precious connection with your partner.
Plus, you can't beat the price on this program. One of our clients, Casey, said a spark in their intimacy is back on track.
Now, Sarah and her husband, you know what she told us, Willow? She said, finally, he learned how to kiss her right.
Oh my God, hallelujah. So happy for Sarah.
So if you want some radical changes in your love life, go to sexreimagined.com, click on courses, and scroll until you find the King and Queen of Hearts. And because you are a fan of the podcast, you can use the King and Queen 10 code in order to get 10% off. That is King and Queen 10, and you can use it in the checkout. Hey there, this is Leah Piper, your Tantra expert. I'm with Dr. Willow Brown, your Taoist expert, and boy, do we have a ringer for you.
Yeah, today we interviewed Elizabeth Hendrick, who was, just one of the coolest interviews I feel like we've had to date. She published her debut work, Exodai is the name of the book, a shockingly honest memoir of love, obsession, and torture in September 2023. And this book shares the astonishing true story of how she came to terms with her sexuality and learned to love herself, placing particular emphasis on her mentally and physically torturous relationship with a sadist Japanese dominatrix.
Oh boy.
So you're going to love this interview, and you're definitely going to want to read her book afterwards. You can get it on Amazon. It's Exodai, Exodai. It is sort of a conglomeration of a Japanese word, which I forget what that means, and something else. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But you're going to dig it. It's really cool.
It's fascinating. Boy, we go into the human psyche and its tenacious desire to heal at all costs.
Mhm.
And boy, does she go to some great lengths to discover self-love, the lengths that you likely have not thought of for yourself. And
you may not need.
Yes, most of us probably will find other paths, but this is one that still deserves its recognition.
Yeah.
Because it worked for Elizabeth, and
Very
I think
inspiring.
her story is very powerful.
Yeah.
So please tune in, turn on, and
fall in love with Elizabeth.
Welcome to the Sex Reimagined Podcast, where sex is shame-free and pleasure-forward. Let's get into the show.
Okay, Elizabeth Hendrick, thank you so much. We're excited to hear your story and talk about your book and dive deep into this experience of yours. You are talking to us today from Japan. So welcome. Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa. Konbanwa. It's
Konbanwa.
nighttime here.
So let's just dive right in. You're in a relationship with a Japanese dominatrix, correct?
Okay. Yeah. So, well, not anymore, but the whole book, the second half of the book is about that story of me being with a Japanese dominatrix. The book, it's a true story. It's a memoir. And it basically charters the journey of me coming to terms with my sexuality. And it goes right back to why I was not comfortable with my sexuality, because I was gay at school and I was ostracized. And it goes through the sort of learning process, consciously accepting it, subconsciously accepting it or not accepting it, and culminates. The second half of the book is this relationship with this Japanese dominatrix who's called Tomo in the book. All through the book, I've used pseudonyms. So Tomo is a pseudonym, but that's her name. And if I mention Tomo, I'm talking about the Japanese dominatrix. So I had a relationship with her for 2 years. I was her slave, properly her private slave. And she reduced me to the absolute zero of submission. And that's basically where I found myself and came out the other side of the void.
I love this.
This
and
is so
sort of
exciting.
learned to love myself. Yeah, it's a very powerful story, actually.
I'm so
learning
curious,
self-love.
like, if you could, like, maybe describe to our audience what that means, like, to who were you kind of before you got into this relationship, and what does it mean to go down to absolute zero to be able to find yourself, and who have you become afterwards?
Lovely question. I love it. We're jumping straight in here. It's fantastic.
Yes, we are.
So
we only have so much time with you, Elizabeth.
I know. And basically, I had a wonderful childhood. I'm British, as you can hear. I was brought up in a very loving family with 2 brothers. Went to private school, all girls school, and it was very clear by the age of 10 that I pretty much was attracted to the other girls in my class. And at first, the girls around me, my peers, just thought this is a bit strange, a bit peculiar. But nobody had a huge issue until puberty. And when I started periods, so in an all-girls school, and this is going back to the 1980s, I'm now 52, so 40 years ago, going through puberty, and white Caucasian, it was very alien for a woman to love another woman. And when your period started, everybody in the class knew. And the question on the tip of everyone's tongue was, how do you feel about Alexandra now? And she was the girl that I fancied at the time. And I said, no change. And it was at that point, as if the class stood back en masse and said, well, now that you're a woman, now that your boobs are performing and boobs are growing and your periods have started, you're a woman and you still fancy women, there's something wrong with you. It's like they stood back and said, you've got a problem. And I wasn't specifically bullied, but I was ostracized and made to feel awful because everybody was naturally homophobic, myself included. And at the time, I was very Christian. I was brought up as a Christian. And as far as I could find, there was nothing in the Bible that would support homosexuality, which for me was testament to lesbianism. Of course, the Bible is misogynistic, so it doesn't even mention the word for women and same-sex interest. So I started to internalize a lot of this hatred and guilt and shame. And I think it hardwired my psyche to have a lack of self-love. Now, that then stayed with me as I went into adulthood. And in my 20s, I was I was basically 100% lesbian. I wasn't even bisexual. And I was having terrible trouble with relationships and love. And every other area of my life was going fantastically. But the area of relationships and love, I hated myself deep down in my psyche. And I sat down with a priest when I was about age 27. And I'd moved to Japan already by then.
Okay.
And I sat down with this priest and he, to say to him, is it okay to be gay before God? And fortunately for me, he was a very liberal-minded priest. He'd been on various continents.
Sat down with the right priest.
Yeah, I absolutely, because some people don't. And you're very impressionable. I mean, I went there almost with a will to become a nun and live in chastity. If the priest said to me, no, it's wrong to be gay. I mean, for me, that was the word of God being delivered.
Yeah.
And he said, it's fine. God is the potter, you are the clay, and he's got a great mission for you, and embrace yourself. Now, he told me that when I was about 27, 28.
Wow.
And I was still, so I accepted my sexuality at a conscious level and thought I was set to go. But I continued to have trouble in relationships, and I couldn't understand why that was. But the reality of the situation was that although I had accepted it consciously, I was still hardwired subconsciously to hate myself. And it wasn't
Would you say
until...
that was internalized homophobia? I've heard that, discussed a bit. Would you label it that way also? Okay.
Yeah, I think it was internalized homophobia because of the reaction of society at the time. And also because of my own Christian beliefs. So I had internalized all this homophobia that was hardwired in my psyche. And just talking to a priest and accepting it consciously didn't do the job that I needed to fully accept myself. And it wasn't until I was in a place of rock bottom years later. I'd actually been on a reality TV show, not something that everybody does, but I was on a reality TV show for entrepreneurs, and I did very, very badly. And I got thrown off the show, but the lead entrepreneur is a bit like the Donald Trump, but it wasn't Apprentice or anything like that. But the lead entrepreneur, the media mogul who was running the show in Britain, he turned to me one day and he said, Elizabeth, maybe you've got an emotional block and that's why you're not succeeding in business. And it's funny how you hear the worst things come from your sort of bitter enemies. The biggest truths come from your bitter enemies. And it was one of the greatest truths. And after I got thrown off that reality TV show, I spent some time in reflection in the countryside in France and read a very good book called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. You might have come across it. Really talks about love and grace and forgiveness and faith in the context of all religions. And it really helped me. And I basically realized when I was about 35 years old, I realized that I didn't love myself as a lesbian woman at a cellular level. And that was the beginning of my journey of healing and learning self-love. And I think it was Woody Allen who said 50% of success is showing up. And I think 50% of solving a problem is acknowledging that there's one in the first place. And so it was my acknowledgement about age 35, 36 that started my journey, which was about 7 or 8 years of going through self-healing, which ended in 2 years of boot camp as Tomo's slave, Tomo the dominatrix. So this learning period, so I'd acknowledged it in about, 2007, I'd acknowledged that I didn't love myself as a lesbian woman at a deep psychic, subconscious level.
Right.
And then 7 years later, I kind of came out the other side of this relationship, of this enslavement with this dominatrix. Now, Dr. Willow asked the question, what did absolute zero mean?
Well, before you answer that, can I just ask a quick question about what you've shared so far? And I'm really curious, you said that your relationships weren't working or they were falling apart or something. I'm really kind of curious, what were the dynamics that were happening in your relationships that were causing you to feel like a failure? Could you share more details about that?
Yeah. First of all, I didn't really have very many relationships. The first relationship I had with another lesbian was at university. And interestingly, she went into that relationship thinking she was straight and that she was just loving me back as a friend. Although, of course, my love was sexual as well as a friend. Mine was more sexual. It was sexual attraction, where she didn't have that initially because she was loving me as a friend and accepting my outpouring of love. And then after we'd been to kind of having this strange relationship where she accepted my love, she one day turned around to me and she said, "I love you too." And the moment she said that, I freaked out. And the reason why I freaked out was because I didn't love myself and I didn't think anybody else could love me, you see. I mean, and then it became a very turbulent, toxic relationship. And she was on a university course that took her overseas in her second year to China. So we got separated. I mean, it was a very, very turbulent relationship. And it was
what does freak out
basis...
mean? Like when you say I freaked out, what did that look like?
Let's take a quick break.
Hey guys, what would it be like if you could last 10 times longer when you're having sex?
We are going to teach you how to gain massive confidence as a lover, all without performance anxiety, gimmicks, or prescription.
This course is perfect for you if you've ever been mortified by a sexual encounter that ended way too early.
Or if you've ever avoided intimacy out of fear that you won't last as long as your lover desires. Or maybe you long to give your partner multiple orgasms but can't last long enough to make that a reality.
Well, good news, we've got your back. And it's in our course, Last 10 Times Longer. Go to sexreimagined.com/last-10 X-longer.
And for all of our favorite listeners out there, we are giving you a discount, 20% off, y'all. Just put in podcast 20, all caps, podcast 20, to get your 20% off of this phenomenal course that you're going to want to review more than once.
The link is in the show notes. We cannot wait to see you inside this course. Plus, don't forget, we always got tons of bonuses. See you there.
I got very confused and I felt very uncomfortable. And I almost stopped loving her because she had turned to me and reciprocated my love. It was, I mean, a part of me was, maybe it was because the chase was over that I'd become so used to. Now there was no chase. She turned around and said, I love you too. And I just, I mean, at first, gradually, my confusion and resistance bled away, but the relationship was still quite toxic, and I was very possessive, very jealous. We were keeping our relationship secret because she didn't want anybody to know we were gay. I mean, still back then, university, this is 1992, 93, people's minds were still very narrow. If people hadn't gone out of the country, and again, it was a very white Caucasian. I was at Durham University in the north of England. It was a very white Caucasian society. And quite narrow-minded and built on Christian traditions, which essentially are homophobic, really.
Totally. Were you aware at that time? You said, were you aware at the time that you know, that the reason that you did sort of like freak out and not be able to receive her love back was because you didn't love yourself, or did you have to take some time to figure that out?
Oh, I had no idea. I had no idea what was going on. My self-awareness has come in the last decade of recent years. At the time, I couldn't have told you, oh, it's a lack of self-love. Oh, I haven't accepted my sexuality. But that's what it was. I hadn't accepted my own sexuality. I didn't think I deserved to be loved. I loathed my sexuality. And the fact that she wanted to keep the relationship secret sort of exacerbated that. Yeah, this is a no-go area.
Yes.
We shouldn't be outdoor people with our love, you know, should be hidden in closed corners. So that was a bit debilitating to the relationship. But the other, in terms of generally having toxic relationships going forward, I mean, what was happening really was I was falling for straight women. So once I started working in the UK, in London, and I was in financial services, what was tending to happen is that I would fall for straight women. And I used to blame the external and just say, well, look, I love women the same way that men love women. They're beautiful. They're maternal. This was the one thing I really loved about straight women, is they're very maternal. And all the lesbians I was meeting were just, you know, they look like a guy. If I'm
more hard
get
and
together,
edgy.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean,
Didn't
that's
have
not
that
the case
soft,
anymore
feminine,
now. But I love the soft, feminine, maternal.
Who doesn't love the soft,
elegant,
feminine, maternal? I mean, come on, it's nurturing.
Yeah.
Like, put me right up next to that chest.
But what I now understand was that I mean, my current girlfriend. So I am in a relationship now, but it's a purely vanilla relationship, and it's happened since I learned to love myself about 6 or 7 years ago. So we've been together for 5 years. She's not that kind of maternal, beautiful, elegant Angelina Jolie type figure. But she's not butch lesbian at all either. But you know, it was me in my 20s setting myself up to fail. So my subconscious was sabotaging my relationships and causing me to fancy people that I was never going to have access to.
That's right.
So again, and I had no idea. Exactly,
Yeah.
attracting the unavailable. So it was all generated by the lack of self-love. And once I healed, my life just got so much better. I was so comfortable with myself. And embraced
It changes
my
everything, doesn't it?
sexuality. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so a big part of, I'm sure you did lots on your healing journey, but, you know, to kind of fast forward to this moment of like this 2-year journey as a slave to this dominatrix Tomo.
You would have had to hear about BDSM first. I mean,
how did you even find this woman?
Yeah, like before you meet a dominatrix, you usually have to discover that this thing exists, right?
Right. Yeah. So At the same time as realizing I was a lesbian, when I was a child, I was quite titillated by criminal punishment and medieval English history.
Okay.
And there was this time when I was at school, and this is the first chapter in this book. It talks about me being at school, age 7 or 8, and having a history lesson with Mrs. Beckwith, and I discover that there's this chapter later on in the book called Crime and Punishment, and the book is called Medieval England. And whilst everyone else is reading out from chapter 1, I'm looking through all the pictures of a man in the pillory and a man on the racks and a bad baker with his bread tied around his neck and all tied up. And I was just really fascinated by this. And I had this little bit of an obsession, and I would go into the school library in the lunch breaks and dig out all the history books looking for scenes of torture and punishment. I was fascinated by it. And I never understood what it was. And then when I was about 8, 9 years old, I used to have these fantasies. When I'd go to bed, I'd have these bondage fantasies, like I'm tied to the table or something like this. And I would start to need the toilet. So I'd get out of bed, go to the bathroom. Well, I've got nothing to urinate. And for years, I had no idea what was going on. But I was getting turned on, you see.
You were turned on.
Wow. I was getting turned on. I had no
Your
idea.
yoni was like, give me an orgasm.
Yeah, well, it had my first orgasm. Actually, when I was only about 13, and it was a complete accident. I had no idea what the concept was until I tried to tie myself up in my duvet, and it was just so scintillating. I was sort of contracting my muscles and stuff, and suddenly, oh my God, what on earth was that? I mean, it was like,
oh
wow,
my gosh,
that was
so it was
bliss.
Purely by accident. Wow.
Yeah.
And
I love that you're like
and
trying to tie yourself up.
I love
and,
that you
like,
remember
constrict
your
yourself
first
with your
orgasm.
duvet.
Gosh.
Oh, I remember
first
my
and only.
You do?
orgasm. Oh,
I
yeah.
do not.
Yeah. I do.
The
I
best-
feel like I
the
was
best
having
one ever.
orgasms at like 8 or 9 or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember taking a sheet and bringing it in between my legs.
Similar to what Elizabeth
and humping the sheet and just going,
Oh, awesome.
well, this is fun.
Awesome. Yeah. Right. Wait, it's instinctive, isn't it? I mean,
It
I
is.
don't know.
Yeah.
It's just that's what I wanted to
Natural.
do, and it erupted in this great pleasure. And there it was.
Yeah.
I suddenly thought, oh, I see. That's what all the fuss is about. It didn't. I mean, I didn't realize straight away. I just worked it out. I thought, oh, that must be an orgasm. That's
Right.
what
Like I
did
never
to
had a
myself.
name for it until I was much older. But there is a feeling of this is forbidden. Don't get caught. It's immensely pleasurable. I remember reading a lot of shame, interwoven in all of it is like this irresistible urge. And it is. It's this biological irresistible urge that the body is drawn to. So,
Right,
all right. So you
exactly.
had this early conditioned response. I would kind of call that like a core desire or a core erotic theme where you this thing about bondage and this fascination with medieval torture. All of that is really a beautiful setup for
Absolutely.
the desire to have this more impact, more sensation as being the door into BDSM and all the ways that you can start to explore that. So what was your first experience into BDSM like?
So I always had fantasies about some kind of bondage and latex and rubber. But I never explored when I was living in London. And in 1999, I was aged 26, 27. I moved to Tokyo for the first time. It was a job opportunity. I went over there as an investment advisor. That first job didn't work out, but being in Japan was brilliant. So I got myself another job as a headhunter. So most of the time in Japan, I was a headhunter. And this was my first time in Japan. I then left and then came back eventually. Anyway, in my first time I was living in Japan, I was at a lesbian party one night. And this is all in chapter 4, this story I'm about to tell you.
Chapter 4,
I was at a lesbian
party.
Chapter
Keep a
4.
note of
I
that.
was at a lesbian party with my friend from church, who was bisexual, and we had gone to this lesbian party, and she was very attracted to this Japanese woman, who in my book is called Junko, and she wanted to meet her. Now, Junko wasn't somebody that I would normally be attracted to, but my friend was. So I went to introduce us to Junko. And Junko was wearing a latex corset. and looking like she was the sexiest person at the party. It wasn't a bondage lesbian party. It was a regular lesbian party, but she had shown up in fetish gear and was attracting a lot of people. Anyway, she's very interested in us, and she clicked straight away that I was into bondage and invited me into her fold. And then she started inviting me to fetish parties. She organized some of these fetish parties. And sure enough, it was quite interesting, actually. I almost let go of the gay scene altogether, where I'd never been very comfortable. And I took to the BDSM scene in Tokyo like a duck to water.
Wow.
And just felt
So she could
completely...
see you before you could see yourself, it sounds like.
Absolutely. You're quite right. She was a Pisces, very, very intuitive, very wise Japanese woman. Not like a lot of Japanese women, actually, but very unique. I mean, we're still very good friends. And she eventually, like 10 or 15 years later, she was the person who introduced me to Tomo. And kind of got us together because Tomo was very attracted to me. Actually, I met Tomo in Bali. That, again, is in the book. But it was Junko who kind of brought us together and said you two would fit well together. So my first actual experience, going back to the question that Leah asked, the actual first BDSM experience I had is having got into the scene through Junko, a mutual friend who was an Australian investment banker. He invited me and a few other friends to a private S&M party at his house. And of course, he was an investment banker, so he had a very swanky mansion apartment. And he'd put latex sheets over all of the furniture. And there were only about 20 people at this party, and he had some of the top mistresses or dominatrices in town and some really hardcore submissive people. And I just sort of went along dressed up as a schoolgirl because you had to go in fancy dress. You had to go in fetish gear, and I didn't have anything. So I knocked together a schoolgirl's outfit. I thought that's a bit kinky. And next thing I know, they've got me bent over Mark's lap on the sofa, and they're saying, Elizabeth's been a very naughty girl. She should be punished. And again, this is in chapter 8, I think it's in chapter 8 in my book, my first BDSM experience. Anyway, it was very interesting because everybody was checking in with me that I was consenting. Now, consent is very important in BDSM. Yes. So every move that happened is like, are you okay with this? I mean, they didn't speak it, but they gave the space for me to say, hold up your hand. And I mean, there's this lovely Finnish girl called Astrid in my book, and she whispers into my ear. She's tying me up at this party, and she whispers into my ear, if there's anything I do that you're not comfortable with, if you want to stop, just don't be embarrassed, just call it out. And all really compassionate, loving people. I've always said that in the BDSM scene, I've always met very, very wise, enlightened, compassionate people. Anyway, so I was getting tied up, and then eventually they were saying, we think let's whip Elizabeth. And they had this little crop whip. And at the time, I thought, well, I'm not really into pain. I like bondage, but I don't really like pain. Pain doesn't turn me on. So I think I'm going to abort now. That's what I thought. But just as I was about to abort, I'm lying on the sofa across Mark and someone else's lap. I looked up in the corner of the room. There's this Japanese lady called Nozomi, who I hadn't really met before. And she just caught my eye. And she was a professional mistress. And she was looking on at me with total glee. And this aura was coming out of her, and she just looked like she was so happy that I was captive. Wow. And I said, you know what? She can whip me, but no one else. So
good for you.
That's
great.
Mark handed the whip to Nozomi, and so Nozomi calls me over, and I go along shuffle on my knees because my arms are all tied up behind my back, and they've ripped off my tartan schoolgirl skirt. I think I still had my knickers on, but they'd pulled the knickers back so my buttocks were bare. Anyway, and Nozomi set to with the horse crop on my buttocks, and it was quite painful. And I thought, oh God, this is a bit embarrassing. I'm in a lot of pain here. I might have to ask her to stop. But she was enjoying herself so much, and I thought, oh well, if she's enjoying herself, then maybe I'll just hang on to this because she's getting a lot of pleasure out of this and I'd like to give her that pleasure. And so it became this kind of this vicious circle that I was giving her pleasure, and because I was giving her pleasure, that gave me pleasure. So I kept enduring the pain, because the more I endured it and the more I suffered, the happier she seemed to be. And so I then said, well, wait a minute, why don't you use, this is just a silly little crop whip. Why don't you use a proper whip? And so she was very thrilled. She went into her toolkit, because they all have a toolkit.
You are pleasing her to no end.
I know, absolutely. I was
Your
on
first
the floor
whipping,
for her.
Elizabeth.
Oh, I jumped in with both feet, you know.
All the way, yeah.
And she got out this huge long snake whip, this huge, like at least a meter long bull whip, leather braided bull whip. And then she brought me to the middle of the living room, which had become a playroom. And she just started whipping my buttocks and thighs all over. And there's this wonderful scene in the book where I describe very graphically what she does and how exhilarated I become. But my exhilaration is because of her exhilaration at seeing me suffer for her.
Yeah.
And
it's like
it was almost like a sort
circuit.
of hero worship. Yeah, it's just amazing. And at the end of that, I was just so euphoric and ecstatic that I thought I had been born again. I thought I've discovered myself. I'm a submissive. I suffer for the pleasure of the lady. And it was really amazing. And that was my very first experience. And it wasn't with Tomo, who's the main dominatrix in the book. It was my first mistress was called Nozomi, and she features in the first half of the book. And she's kind of my initiation, if you will, that took me to seventh heaven.
So
was your butt sore for like weeks after? Like, what was the aftermath of that?
It's quite interesting, actually. Again, this scene, I'm having this discussion on the telephone with Astrid, saying, "Are these scars going to be here forever? Am I scarred forever?" And actually, no. They all go. Whipped scars. They go where the flesh is tight, they heal pretty quickly. Where the flesh is a bit loose, like around the buttocks,
takes a
bit longer. So I had those scars for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then they were completely gone. No permanent damage.
Did you get like turned on when you would pay attention to the aftermath scars?
It wasn't. This is the weird thing. I never actually got turned on. I got turned on by being tied up, but for suffering pain, I never actually got turned on. So there's a subtle difference between a submissive and a masochist. So a masochist actually gets turned on by pain. A submissive kind of gets turned on by being dominated, by accepting whatever the mistress will dish out. But I looking at my scars, it was more this sort of feeling of heroism that I had suffered for the lady. And it kind of sort of bled back to some of my fantasies as a child, you know, putting the lady on a pedestal and worshipping her, and wanted to suffer to save her and be her white knight. Again, because I was falling for the inaccessible. So by saving the woman, maybe I would get her attention. That was part of my program, modus operandi, I suppose, my paradigm that was going on in my head.
So it sounds like there's a lot of
I was
euphoria.
very proud.
A lot of euphoria, a lot of subspace, but it wasn't climatic. You didn't have a climax.
No, I did. Maybe Nozomi did, but I didn't. I didn't actually have most of my S&M relationships with mistresses, except for one, which was a British mistress, and she was bisexual. All my Japanese mistresses, actually, I would say all. There were 3 in total, and 2 feature in my book. It was all really about pain and love. Yeah. Suffering and love, and lots of delusion as well. But there's a bit of lesbian sex in my book, in the early part of the book, but there's not very much BDSM steamy kink. It's not a romp. It's not a sexual romp, really. It's much more about love. I mean, some of the reviews that people have written about my book, I mean, this is my true story, but some of the reviews that have been written, a lot of people talk about how this is not a BDSM romp. This is a story about love and sacrifice, delusion and redemption, because I come out the other side learning to love myself.
Okay, so fast forward, you've been initiated into the scene, you're experiencing psychological benefit, you're having self-realizations, and then you meet
Tomo.
and you take it to the next level. Were you a 24-hour slave?
Essentially, 24/7, although there was an understanding that, I had to work for a living, so she couldn't call me out of a meeting or anything like that. But all my social time, I was 24/7. So I would, if she needed me on a Sunday morning, I'd have to drop everything and go and deal with whatever she needed.
Did you live together?
No, we didn't live together.
Okay.
She lived outside of Tokyo, so she would come and stay at my house a lot. But here's the thing: I had a very nice 1-bedroom apartment at the time. But if she came and stayed, I would make the double bed for her. We wouldn't sleep together. I would sleep in the living room, and she would have the bedroom, and I would just serve her while she was at my house, and I would clean the bed sheets before she came. I had tons of her stuff. I put out her pajamas, always bring her, make sure her favorite food was in the house and everything, so I could cook her a full English breakfast or whatever the next day. So basically, we were not living together, but anytime she came to Tokyo, she stayed at my house, and I was at her beck and call.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about the master-slave dynamic, because I think a lot of, people hear that, especially in the vanilla world, and they're like, what? Like, they have this imagery of American slavery, right? And so it's like they've got these pictures. We've got race dynamics. You've got, pain, torture, a lot of objectification, subjugation. So can you tell us a little bit about what your experience of being in a master-slave dynamic looked like, an average day?
Let's take a quick break.
Ladies, do you want to explore your sexuality and experience true sexual healing?
The Vaginal Orgasms Masterclass teaches you and your partners how to unlock your full sexual potential and awaken the G-spot, the sacred spot, and the cervix for an unforgettable sexual experience. Would learning how to finally surrender and release grief, fear, and uncertainty benefit your outlook on life, love, and relationships? We certainly think so. Common misconceptions of the G-spot, including its anatomy and function as an erogenous zone, will be covered in this course.
Plus, we're going to teach you 7 different massage strokes for the G-spot that dissolve blocked energy and increase your pleasure tenfold.
We're going to teach you how to locate the sacred spot and the best methods to stimulate it for maximum pleasure.
And you're going to learn about cervical orgasm techniques, which are the most powerful and also often elusive style of climaxing. This class is primarily geared toward women, but men have taken it as well and learned so much about how to pleasure their partners.
So get ready for multiple O's, my friends. And you can get all of that at sexreimagined.com/female-masterclass. And for being a listener of the show, we've got a beautiful coupon code for you. It is 20% off this course. Just type in podcast20, that's all caps, podcast20, and get yourself a great deal on this on-demand course.
It's interesting because looking back at it now, I just think I was an absolute lunatic to put myself in this relationship. But it was the lack of self-love, you see, and I thought I should be punished at a subconscious level. But the way it looked was that in the beginning, Tomo and I met as friends, and then I kind of became what she called a handmaiden, and in Japanese it was shimobute, or so, I've forgotten the word now. Shimobe, which means handmaid. And so she was still loving me as a friend, but I became her handmaid. But when I transitioned to slave, and she took me 100% as her slave, everything became very different. And whilst we had some torture sessions, in Japan, you can book a hotel for 2 hours, and some of them are themed with BDSM furniture. And there was a BDSM themed Love Hotel, very near to where I lived. It was a 10-minute walk. So we would go there to have a session, and she would do different kinds of torture, I don't know, during the course of those 2 or 3 hours. So when we had a session, what would happen is that she would do something and I would suffer, and then she would show me this maternal affection and appreciation and thanks and gratitude that I had suffered for her. And when I became her slave 100%, all of that maternal affection disappeared. And I had mistakenly thought that that was her love for me as the dominatrix. But it wasn't. It was her love for me as a friend. And the Japanese are very departmentalized in their thinking. So when she took me on 100% as her private slave, she jettisoned all the friendship feelings she had for me, and set that aside and just went 100%, I am her slave. So I was absolutely degraded. I wasn't even worth. So after a while, I couldn't even kiss her feet. I had to kiss the strut of her boot or the underside of her shoe. And everything, she had to go first. I'd had to do everything for her. But it wasn't so much that we were role playing 24/7. It kind of became very real. And I was really subjugated. She properly, mentally and physically dominated me. But the mental domination and the mental torture I found much more insufferable. The physical torture I was actually quite strong for, but the mental torture was very difficult.
This went on for 2 years. Like, how was this shifting your relationship to you loving yourself? Like,
yes,
I'm just
good question. So I think probably I should say that for the first year of the relationship, we were in this shimobe phase where I was her handmaid, and actually things were going quite nicely. She left me in want a lot because going along in all of this, I started to develop an addiction to torture, and that became my quintessential expression of love, was suffering pain for her. And so I guess for the first year, I was her handmaid, her shimobe, and she was struggling to decide whether to take me fully as her slave or fully as her friend, because the half and half arrangement wasn't really working for her, because she thought there are things that she would do to me as a slave that she would never do to her friends. And she was actually at the point where she wanted to go back and say, let's just be friends. But I really wanted to be her slave because I didn't know what I was letting myself in for. Anyway, we eventually graduated. So the second half, so for about 1 year, we were properly slave and master. And I guess for the first 6 months, it was just really hardcore training and me realizing step by step that she's abandoned any kind of show of love. She's not given me any affection. There's no emotional support. And all of that had come in the first year because she loved me as a friend. But she'd taken that all away. So I was just getting no reciprocation for my efforts, and no recognition, for my efforts. And it was becoming increasingly difficult. And I was actually, after about 18 months, I was nearly going to split up with her. And I had gone home to England with her permission. She never would have said, no, you can't go to England, but still, I had to get her permission. I'd gone home to England, and this was in the Christmas of 2013, and I'd gone home to England for 3 weeks for Christmas. And this story again is in my book, I had a spiritual guru in London who was a really intuitive, psychic man, like Gandalf the wizard. He was a really hocus pocus type of guy, did a lot of breath work treatment with me and everything. Really beautiful spiritual guru. Anyway, I went to see him, and he used to have cards that he consulted to reach the Holy One. Not occult cards, but spiritual cards of some way, shape, some substance. And we put the question, I said to him, I really feel like I should split up with Tomo, stop being her slave and just be her friend. And he put the question to the Holy One, and he agreed with me. He said, yes, I think you've reached the zenith. I think it's probably better to back out of this arrangement. And he consulted his cards, and the cards basically said that there was an incredible opportunity for spiritual growth and soul development if I stayed in the relationship. And it's amazing. I mean, I'm still unpacking some of this, even now as I'm talking to you. It was right. It was correct, because I was taken to such a low, absolute zero of submission that all of my crutches and all of my resources and everything was stripped free from me. I had even just lost a huge deal at work, and I was going to get fired and everything. I was at total rock bottom. And I couldn't have reached that place without being in this relationship, being this slave to this mistress. And it was from this absolute zero that new shoots started to grow, had the space to start to grow, because they weren't suffocated by all the crutches of life that we have. Alcohol, sugar, church. Church isn't always a crutch, but, addictions.
Yeah, some of the
all these crutches that we
indoctrinated
have.
beliefs can be. Yeah.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey guys, what would it be like if you could last 10 times longer when you're having sex?
We are going to teach you how to gain massive confidence as a lover, all without performance anxiety, gimmicks, or prescription.
This course is perfect for you if you've ever been mortified by a sexual encounter that ended way too early.
Or if you've ever avoided intimacy out of fear that you won't last as long as your lover desires. Or maybe you long to give your partner multiple orgasms but can't last long enough to make that a reality.
Well, good news, we've got your back, and it's in our course, Last 10 Times Longer. Go to sexreimagined.com/last-10x-longer.
And for all of our favorite listeners out there, we are giving you a discount, 20% off, y'all. Just put in podcast 20, all caps, podcast 20, to get your 20% off of this phenomenal course that you're going to want to review more than once.
We cannot wait to see you inside this course. Plus, don't forget, we always got tons of bonuses. See you there.
And once those were all stripped from me and my self-esteem and everything, I was able to reach deep inside me and start to pull out the inner child and love and heal that inner child. Now, I had that spiritual guru in London who advised me. So I thought, well, okay, I'll stick with it for a few more months and just kind of play it day by day. And then I also did a past life regression.
Okay.
And this I did in March or April of 2014. And I don't know what to say about past lives and life after death and everything. I mean, it's a fascinating subject, and I've seen so many stories about Indian reincarnations and stuff, and kids that knew people that they used to live with and stuff, and born into a new body. I mean, it all fascinates me, but I just thought, well, let's just go into this with an open mind. It was actually the conductor of my choir who recommended this form of therapy. Anyway, I went to this bilingual Japanese lady called Micah, who was a regression therapist. And she took me on this, I think I went to see her 3 sessions. On the 3rd session, we did the actual therapy, where she hypnotized me and took me back in time to before I was born, and then into whatever, apparently your soul draws you to the life that you need to reckon with. Anyway, turns out I was a mentally disabled man in the 1500s, somewhere in Eastern Europe. And in a little village, because I was mentally disabled, the villagers got me to light the pyre under the stake at which witches would be burned. And in this previous life, Tomo was apparently one of these witches, and I set fire to her and really enjoyed it and got a lot of exhilaration out of it. Now, that was the story that came to me. Now, whether it was something my mind imagined or fabricated,
Sure.
maybe it really did. Maybe I really did have a past life with this soul, and that
Right.
existed. But whether or not it absolutely happened in the past or not, the emotional reaction I had to reliving that was so powerful and so releasing that I think that was one of the major turning points in my life that started me on this big journey to self-healing. I mean, I was already on the journey, but this was a big, steep rise on that journey
Right.
towards self-love.
It sounds like it
and
helped
I
give you some meaning and
yeah.
like to
It
help
also-
make sense of this dynamic that you were in.
Right. It made me realize that I was one of her assailants in a previous life. And it almost like leveled, this is why she's treating me so badly now. And now the karma has come back. I mean, that was one take on the situation, which made me find her insufferable behavior so much more palatable. Once I thought, well, I was her assailant once. I tortured her once. Now she's torturing me. Great. Excellent. Karma's balancing. It's fascinating, but without a doubt, after that regression, and that was the soul journey and soul learning that I think this spiritual guru in London had seen in his cards. And then I did that, and then there was other things. I had another therapist who I used to call into. She lived in Dubai, because I was in Dubai for 5 years as well. In the middle of my 2 times in Tokyo and being an entrepreneur and on reality TV show, I'd lived in Dubai for 5 years, and I had a very good spiritual guru there as well. So I was getting a lot of help from people, mostly not proper registered psychiatrists, but very spiritually mature, enlightened gurus, as I call them. And they really helped me. And I think the culminating point, what started to happen in the last 6 months of this relationship with Tomo, after I'd done this regression therapy, was I was starting to find that we were no longer in sync. Now, what I mean by that is, you asked the question about 24/7. She would expect me to drop everything and run across town to serve her. And what was very strange is that I still had a social diary, and I still did things with my friends. And it was strange. It's like anytime she called me, I happened to be free. Whereas after I'd done this regression and started to love myself, we started to clash. Our diaries started to clash. We weren't in sync anymore.
Very interesting.
And so I was having to turn down my... Yeah, it's fascinating. It was a very, very, very spiritual experience, the whole thing. I mean, I was vibrating on this very high level spiritually throughout the whole relationship. Yeah. And these things were happening, and I started to realize it was my soul calling out, this is not right. Because I was starting to love myself. I was starting to resent her treatment of me and what had all become mental torture by then. And finally, I realized I need to get out of this relationship. I mean, there was one occasion where there was a lot of delusion, and I had convinced myself that I was going to save Tomo from her inner demons. And this was part of the reason why I stayed with her in the last few months. I thought that I had to suffer the slings and arrows of her outrageous torture in order to take the burden of suffering off her, so that she could then break down and free her demons. And it was delusion, because I was chaining myself to this toxic relationship, and I was selling myself this story to keep enchained in the relationship.
Right. Do you look back and think of her now and believe that she did have that she still needs that? Or do you feel like you have a different perspective?
I think we all have internal demons, but I think that you can only save yourself. You can help people, give them some hints, but you can't actually save other people. No. And I had convinced myself I could save her. I think I was tremendously helpful to her, but I couldn't save her. And it wasn't, I was pressing for this final showdown session where she would be whipping me and she would suddenly break down in tears, and I would be there at hand to comfort her. And again, saving the damsel in distress, kind of an obsession
being
of
the
mine.
savior. Yeah.
I wanted to
complex.
be her savior. And it was impossible. And I just eventually realized I was deluding myself, and the self-love started to point me in a different direction, which meant, you've got to get out of this relationship because you love yourself now and you shouldn't be punished anymore.
So it was like all that torture and enslavement was really matching your belief about yourself and the frequency and the vibration that you carried inside of you, and to really be met. I mean, that's what we all truly want, right? Is to be met.
Right.
That's why we do attract toxic relationships, and we
Right.
do get into things that are like, oh, that must be what love is, because that's what I've always known it was. That's what my parents exemplified or whatever. And so to actually really be met in that low place was the thing that you needed to really start to understand what loving yourself truly was. I'm curious if there was like a moment with her where you were like in that slave role with her, like an actual moment, or if it was more of a gradual thing. And, this past life regression was part of the turning point for sure. But was there a moment where you were just like, wait a second, like awake to the fact that you do love yourself, actually?
I think there was it was gradual after the
More
regression
gradual.
therapy. It was gradual, but there were a couple of pointers. There was one occasion where she called me to do a job at Sunday lunchtime, and I had arranged to meet my best friend for lunch, and I had to cancel the lunch, and I was just crying out against it. I was saying, "You can't. What are you doing? You can't do this. This is terrible. You shouldn't be doing this." And I just started to feel these things very strongly. And then the book, the last chapter of the book ends with me. So I was hoping to have this session with her. And there was this occasion where she asked me to meet her at 10 p.m. at Alpha Inn. Now, Alpha Inn was the name of the S&M Love Hotel in Tokyo. And she asked me to, out of the blue one day, she asked me to meet her there. And that could, from my point of view, from my perspective at the time, who's addicted to torture, totally 100% obsessed, really struggling to get my Hollywood ending, this breakdown when I save her from her demons, I thought she was calling me to a session at the hotel. So I'd actually got to a point where I thought I was going to exorcise her demon, as in exorcism. And I literally packed in my bag that night to go and meet her. I stole some holy water from the church. I painted a red crucifix on my chest. I had a Bible, and I literally thought I was going that night to exorcise demons in this S&M Love Hotel. And that's what I thought I was doing. And I went and I got to the hotel. I mean, it's a very exciting scene in the book. I hope I don't spoil it for anyone by telling them this, but basically she was already there with a client. She's a professional mistress, and she just wanted me to pick up her bags and take them home. And then she was going to come. She just wanted me to meet her there and carry her stuff for her. And I built up so much, the psychological build-up, and thinking I was going to be properly tortured. I used to call it my DEFCON. You have DEFCON states for whether US is ready to go to war or not. And DEFCON 1 means you're at war. DEFCON 2 means everything is ready to go to war. I was at DEFCON 2, properly charged in my whole psyche to get tortured and exorcise demons with my Bible and my crucifix painted on my chest. I tell you, I was totally deluded. I mean, I said I was a lunatic at the time. And anyway, it didn't happen. And all of my castles came crashing down. And we sat there in the taxi going back to my house. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. What on earth is going on? I was just crying out. And I think that was probably one of the other sort of key moments, pressure points, where I just thought, this is not right. Something's wrong here.
So was that the end? Was that when you said I'm done?
I then called it a day, I think, about a month later after that, and I told her. But I recognized that she had taught me to love myself, and that was my motivation for leaving her. And so I made her a beautiful gift. I made her a mosaic of a lotus flower. And because I want to say thank you. Thank you for teaching me to love myself. But because I love myself, I can't be your slave anymore. So I'm leaving you, but thank you. And I mean, I think she was devastated for about 10 minutes. I was
Jeez.
maybe a month or two.
I'm so curious, Elizabeth, do you think or know if she knew that this was the pathway for you to self-love? Like, was she aware of what she was doing?
Well, she was a very intuitive woman. She could read me like a book, and she knew when she called me to meet her at that hotel at 10 p.m. that night. She knew that she was teasing. She knew it was a huge tease to make me think there was going to be a session when there wasn't. She knew exactly what she was doing. I couldn't see that at the time, but looking back, she knew what she was doing.
Did she have the psychological finesse to know that the intention of this journey between you and her was about breaking you down so that you could reach that place of self-discovery, of self-realization, of finding that self-love? And her path forward was to break you down so thoroughly and so headfuck you that you could reach that? Or was that not the intentional game that was being played? This is just the surprise, or this was
just what came out of
thing
it
that just shows up. Was there an understanding that this potential was here?
I think there's a bit of both. I think on a very deep level that she probably couldn't even verbalize or think herself, but something was driving her on a deep psychological level to know this is what Elizabeth needs.
Mm-hmm.
And
almost like your
I'm
souls
here to deliver
were playing something out, and then your bodies were like being the clay,
I think she had because I just remember her once telling me that she was talking about some of her previous male private slaves. And I remember her telling me once that one of her slaves had left her because she fixed him. And I think it was the same kind of thing. And if she's out there, if she talks about me out there, she probably says she left me because I cured her. That's probably what she would say. And I would have no qualms with that. I mean, I still see her. We for about 2 years after the relationship, she got over me very quickly, I'm sure. I took 2 years to get over it because I still loved her. And I was really screwed up, but I loved myself. But no, I loved her. It was an infatuation. And but it was actually proper love. I'd like to call it unconditional love, because I did try to love her whatever, and unconditional love takes effort and commitment, and it wasn't happening naturally. But I constantly, and this is one of the reasons why I saved myself, is because the situation was so toxic that it had every opportunity to go badly for me, and for me to be in a much worse position than I was before going into a relationship. So there's, in any codependent relationship, you have an equal opportunity to grow or to decline. And I think what determines whether you grow or whether you decline is your approach to every situation. And if you apply love, forgiveness, and honesty to the situation, you will grow. It will come back to you. Love, honesty, forgiveness will always, in the long term, work.
Yeah, they're multipliers. Right.
Exactly. Whereas if you apply hatred, jealousy, possessiveness, and anger, then you have the chance to decline. Yeah, exactly. So it's a downward spiral. So I just constant, and this is, you see, it's the yin and yang of my Christianity. So at the time I was with Tomo, I was still very much a Christian, and the irony is it's my own Christianity and my belief, my adolescent naive beliefs, that made me loathe myself. But it was that very same faith that dug me out of myself and
Right.
taking the noble
So much
Right.
irony in your story.
God, I know.
You know,
I think
like
this is so fascinating.
it's so
Oh,
fascinating.
I can't wait to read your book and have you back on the show.
Yeah.
Oh,
Elizabeth.
please do. Yeah, I'd love to have
I
more
can't-
questions from
Yeah.
once you've read the book. Yeah.
Well, I am curious in sort of wrapping up our conversation today, because we could talk for a whole nother hour easily. What does your practice of self-love look like today? Where are you at with it?
Well, I a lot of the healing process after I split up with Tomo, a lot of the healing process involved hiking in the Japanese mountains, and
Japan is so phenomenal. Oh my God,
it's just amazing, and everything is so well organized and it's so safe. I mean, you're more in danger. So there's this story going around the internet at the moment: the bear versus the man. What would the woman be more afraid of bumping into in the woods? And all the women are saying the bear. In Japan, all of the women are saying they'd be more afraid of the man than the bear. But in Japan, it's the other way around. You would actually be more afraid of the bear, I think, because everything's so safe. Everyone's so well behaved here.
Right.
But the mountains are just beautiful, and they keep their hiking courses fresh, so they're constantly trodden out, and they're very well signposted. So that's one of the healing things. I've also always done yoga. I do Bikram yoga, which is the hot yoga.
Yeah.
Of course, Bikram Chowdhury he's a fugitive in Mexico, I think, now because of sexual harassment. But
Right.
his yoga system, nonetheless, still works extremely well, and people still practice it. It's the 26 positions in hot yoga.
It's a little bit like torture too.
Yeah.
It is actually a kind
Bikram.
of torture. Torture self-discipline and mortification of the flesh are very, very good for the soul, and for spiritual growth. And I think, I often feel it's very sad to keep healthy. We have to do certain things like give up wine, or for a month
Stop
I always
eating
give
sugar.
up alcohol in January.
Yeah, that's all
and
more
it's cut back.
discipline. That's
it's
right.
hard.
But doing hard things makes you more resilient.
It does.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
And you
but
live longer.
But the things I'm doing now, self-love, is just looking after myself, eating healthily, indulging from time to time. I mean, I still have vices like coffee. Occasionally I give up coffee for fun, but it's not fun, so I don't do it very often.
Have you given up being tortured or BDSM?
So that's a very good question. So the origin of my interest in BDSM was the love of bondage, and I still absolutely love bondage. I still go to bondage parties. I still put on my latex, and if there's an opportunity to be tied up, well, sure, bring it on. But I wouldn't put myself into that position where I have someone properly torturing me with a whip. I just don't need to do it. It doesn't excite me, and I don't need to go there again.
Sounds like you transcended it.
I'll do small things just for fun to bring pleasure to the woman, but I'm not going to be anyone's private slave anymore. And the relationship that I'm now in, which has been going on for 5 years, and we live together, and she's Japanese, but she's completely vanilla.
Okay.
We're just two lesbians together. Really, really
Do
great
you identify
companions.
as a submissive still?
Not really, no. I've
Okay.
kind of buried that side of me, and I'm 52 now. To be honest, I haven't took quite a lot of energy. I mean, I was 41 when I was serving Tomo, and I couldn't do it now. I would exhaust myself. I was very fit back. I mean, I'm still quite fit now, but when I was 40, I was very, very fit for my age. And I had to have a lot of energy to serve this woman. She was high octane. I mean, gosh, she was a flippity digit. What's the word?
I don't know. I've never heard that word.
It's in the Sound of Music. The nuns,
Yes.
where they're
It sounds
singing about
familiar.
how
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
solve a problem with Maria.
Problem like Maria.
A flippity digit, a will o' the wisp, a clown. That's what they.
Yes.
Flippity digit,
Oh
a
my
will o' the
God.
wisp, a
Good job.
clown. How do you solve a problem like Maria?
My mom's favorite movie.
How do you get the cloud and pin it down? She was one of those women. Anyway, Maria
Well,
wasn't
what
a dominatrix.
fascinating story. It's really cool to hear
Amazing.
your journey
Yeah.
of really having a truly cathartic experience that's way outside the box. that you had enough, self-awareness and wherewithal to make sure that you came out of this the other side better than worse. And that's the best we can hope for whenever we engage with anybody new. Is
Any
that they leave us better
relationship.
than the way they found us. And it sounds like Tomo did that for you.
Yeah, it's amazing story. And I'm so glad I wrote about it and wrapped it up in a book. A lot of people have been finding it very helpful. I had one disabled man write on one of my YouTubes about my book, my YouTube videos about my book. He wrote, I'm midway through your amazing book. I'm a disabled man and cross-dresser, and your book is helping me unpeel layers about who I think I am. So, I mean, that, just for that, it's worth writing the book.
Hold up your book again, Elizabeth. Tell us the name of it.
It's helping people. Exodai.
Exodai.
You can find it on Amazon. It's in all Amazon markets, global Amazon markets. You'd probably need to type in Elizabeth Hendrick for it to come up in search. I haven't sold 1 million copies yet, so it's not. If you just type in Exodai, my book probably won't come up. So you need to type in my surname as well, Hendrick.
Okay, perfect.
Hendrick, great. Well,
Awesome.
I'm sure we're going to get lots of questions from this episode, so we'll keep on going deeper. We'll have you back, and thank you so much.
Sure. Wonderful. Well, Dr. Willow, Leah, thank you very much for having me. It's been a thrill. You're a lovely interviewer. It's really nice to have people listening hard. As I talk too much. I'm sorry about that. Look, I've started again.
Oh, no,
we're captivated the whole time.
You're a great storyteller, and you'll capture so many minds, and I know there's going to be so much curiosity and hearts too. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Bless you both.
All right, everybody, stay tuned. You know what's next? It's Dr. Willow and Leah, and we got a dish about it. So get a cup of tea, and we'll see you soon. Love, love, love.
Now, our favorite part, the dish.
Well, master slave, dishity-doo-dah.
Oh, my gosh.
What did you think?
I felt like that was one of the most fascinating interviews we've done yet. I just was captivated, really, truly, like to have Elizabeth telling her story, not to mention just, her British accent is captivating in and of itself.
Right.
And just her whole journey through like realizing she's lesbian, she loves women, like all the self-loathing, the shame, the sense of low self-worth that she carried for so many of her years. And like what it really speaks to the power of that dom and sub, the BDSM realm. It really speaks to the power of like that was the only way that she was ever going to find her way to loving herself.
Really fascinating.
Was to actually be like in that slave relationship with her dom at such a degrading level. Yeah. Because that's how low her love for herself was. And she needed to be met there. Yeah. She needed to be witnessed in that place and seen from that viewpoint so that she could actually be like, hang on.
To strip it all down.
Yes.
To get like as low and as horrible, like that reflection, not just being internalized, but having it be externalized.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that the psyche was able to wipe it clean to the extent that like she said, these fresh shoots, these green shoots were able to now grow. And it's from there that she saw a new part of herself, new realizations that I actually don't want to be treated like shit anymore.
Yeah.
I don't have to be.
Yeah. And then like she had to get out of that relationship. She started to see it was toxic because she was no longer in that place anymore. I think that's just it's really
profound, deeply profound. I was sharing this with Om after the interview, and he said that is such a classic slave master, a deep pull, gravitational pull. Like in that moment when she is looks over and sees that dominatrix at that first party, that fetish party that she goes to.
Yeah.
And she's seen that dominatrix glow, light up, watching her experience this. And then she's like, I'll take her.
Yeah.
And then she has that, and then asking for the whip and getting off, not arousal.
On the pain.
Which is a very important distinction for the slave master relationship. Because the slave's motivation is not pleasure. The submissive's motivation is pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
We want a shift in the system. But the slave-master dynamic is not necessarily motivated by that. If they get pleasure, how nice. But it's motivated. That devotion comes from wanting to see the master's happiness, wanting to experience their suffering, transforming the master's system.
Yeah.
How it's really wanting to see the master's shift in their system is so supersedes everything else.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine wanting that. Is one of the things that I was experiencing inside myself.
Oh, me too.
But
I'm
fascinated and delighted by the human psyche's capacities.
I think, it's really profound. It's making me excited for the BDSM weekend coming up.
I know. And I really didn't realize that this was one of our topics today when we sat down. So I was like, how apropos.
Yeah, totally.
I'm hosting
introductory weekend.
Introductory experience into Dark Eros, y'all. So I'm sure we'll talk about it in one of our future L&W episodes.
Yes,
we look forward to that.
All right, y'all.
Yeah. So, I'm assuming we're going to get some controversial stuff from this episode. I'm sure this is going to stir up a lot of feelings for some of you out there. So just remember, stay open, stay curious, and tell us all your thoughts.
Yeah, leave us comments. Let us know what you think. We're so curious.
Love, love, love.
Ciao.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode was hosted by Tantric Sex Master Coach and Positive Psychology Facilitator Leah Piper, as well as by Chinese and Functional Medicine Doctor and Taoist Sexology Teacher Dr. Willow Brown. Don't forget, your comments, likes, subscribes, and suggestions matter. Let's realize this new world together.